my group of agents, I tell you what, they're rock stars. They're meeting the need where it is. And anytime you can attend a class from your house, that's pretty nice in my opinion. I see on our participants list the name Donna Fair on there. Is that the Donna Fair from the USDA Nursery Research Donna Fair? If so, I'm a little intimidated. You don't have to answer. But anyways, I'm an agent here in Rutherford County. And prior to coming to Extension, I ran a landscaping business. So I will stand before you a sinner. A lot of these plants that I tell you are not good to plant, I've planted them. I've paid a lot of mortgages and truck payments planting them. But I've seen the error of my ways. So hopefully tonight I can show you what the duds are and give you some good alternatives. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So a word to the wise, and I give this talk to homeowners a lot, and I just try to give you some basic tips before you go out to the garden center. You know, just because a plant is for sale at the local garden center doesn't mean it's suitable for your home landscape. I go out time and time again, and I see plants for sale that they're not suited for our area. They don't like our soils. They don't like our weather. They don't like the insect and disease pressure we have. So just because Lowe's, Home Depot, Walmart, and your local nursery selling it doesn't mean you need to take it home. Be cautious of any plant that's labeled as low maintenance and sometimes fast growing. In my experience, there is no such thing as a low maintenance or no maintenance plant. They're all going to require some maintenance. And I say fast growing because, and this is not across the board, but you think about plants like a Bradford pear or a hybrid red maple. Those are both low maintenance, high fast growth rate, but they turned out to be real duds. So we got to be careful about those things and do your homework. You know, you're doing it right now. So I commend you guys for attending this talk. Understand what plants do well in your area and consider your site more than anything else. Don't just go out and start buying stuff willy-nilly. I know that urge will hit you when you get to the garden center. I struggle with it every time, trust me. But do your homework. Know what your soil type is like. Know what your drainage is like, and know what your environmental conditions are like in your landscape. So what do I consider a dud plant? What are the qualities? Obviously, anything that's highly susceptible to disease or insect. I will say this, if there is an insect named after the plant, I'll give you an example, crepe myrtle bark scale or euonymus scale. Those are two different scale insects and they're named after the host plant. So if you have an insect that's named after the plant, you can do the math. It's probably going to be susceptible. This is a big one that I see here in Middle Tennessee. I know some of you guys are probably in better soil areas than I am, but a lot of these plants are not tolerant of our clay soils, and we have poor drainage here in the Central Basin. They have poor growth characteristics and weak branching. The classic example is Bradford pear, one of the worst trees ever cultivated. Anything that's invasive or potentially invasive. You know, there's a lot of plants listed on our invasive plant list now that were once readily available in the nursery trade and were sold left and right, and they became invasive. You know, they produced a lot of seeds, and the birds deposited those seeds into forested areas. And unfortunately, these invasive plants have no natural predators, so they outcompete our native plants, and those native plants struggle to find a way in a heavily infested area. And some things are just plain ugly and boring. So stop asking plants to do the impossible. These are a series of photos that I took here in just outside of Murfreesboro. This is a new neighborhood, and they had cleared what was there, which was trees, probably kind of a cedar glady pasture type area. They had clear cut it. They had shoveled off whatever topsoil was there. And all that remained was exposed limestone and cherty rock. And what they were doing in this spot is they were building houses. And within a matter of weeks, this is what you had. You had a sodded front yard. They planted a hybrid red maple in the front yard. Now you tell me, you put down fescue sod and you put it on top of this. I don't care how much irrigation you have, it's not going to last. But the trees and shrubs that they planted, none of them were suited to deal with this type of soil type. So we ask our plants to do impossible things. So let's get right into the duds. This one right here is one that probably every one of us has seen, touched, felt, or even planted, or you may even have some in your landscape. And if you'd asked me this question prior to about 6 months ago, I inherited about 20 of them in my landscape, and they all died last summer. And they're gone now. I was glad to chop them down. It was a hell of a lot of work, but I was glad to get rid of them. The problems with these are numerous. Ceridium canker is one of them, Botryosphaera blight, bagworms, and this is how we like to plant Leland cypress. And I say we as in the human species. We like to plant them in straight rows. Typically, we'll plant them way too close together. And when you lose one of these, there's a gaping hole there. So this is why we encourage mixed screen plantings. And that's a fancy word for saying use 2 or 3 different species and kind of stagger them, make it look more visually appealing. This is Ceridium canker. And if you've ever had Leland cypress, you've probably seen this. This is basically where those limbs, we call them flagging limbs, they'll turn brown. And this is brought on by heat, drought stress and heat, and winter cold weather in combination with heat. It's a perfect storm for Ceridium canker. Botryopspherium blight is another one that they're very prevalent to. And of course, bagworms. We've probably all seen bagworms. So lots of things bad about them. This one kind of pains me a little bit because these certainly are pretty trees, ornamental cherries and plums. There's a whole host of problems, and they're just not long-lived trees. But the most common thing I see is bacterial shot hole. And I'm sure if you have a cherry tree or anything in that prunus genus, which is anything that's our stone fruit, even our fruiting stone fruits, cherries, apricots, plums, things like that, you've probably seen these holes start forming in the leaves, mid to late summer. And a lot of times these leaves will completely turn yellow, or as we call it, chlorotic, and those leaves will fall off very premature. I've seen cherry trees almost completely void of leaves. We're talking the end of August, September, and by October, there's nothing but twigs. Does this kill the tree? Not necessarily. It's not fatal, it's cosmetic, and certainly we don't necessarily want our trees to be losing leaves that early, but it's typically not fatal, it's just cosmetic. You would get these canker diseases. I'm sure we've all seen this oozing sap that comes out, and it can be the result of a canker, or it can be the result of an insect called the peachtree borer, which is a clear-winged moth that actually will lay eggs in the base of these trees, and then the larvae will burrow in. Now, oak trees are one of the best trees you can plant. Some are better than others, and I'll tell you, these two that I have listed here are ones that I would try to avoid if at all possible, and that's a pin oak and a willow oak, and there's a couple reasons why. We have determined that there is a disease, or it's a problem. Bacterial leaf scorch is what it is, and it's actually a bacterium. And what happens is there's an insect called a leaf hopper, and those are those little bitty, big four-headed bugs that they land on your arm and then they bounce off so quick you hardly see them. That's a leaf hopper. Well, they spread this bacteria when they feed on the phloem or the foliage of these plants, and that bacterium clogs the vascular tissue. So it's kind of like having clogged arteries in a human being. So what happens when it gets hot in the summertime, typically this starts, mid to late summer, when these trees are getting slightly stressed, there's no ability for that tree to replenish moisture because that vascular tissue is clogged up. So you'll see kind of a mottled look to the leaves like this. It'll kind of look scorched on the edges, and of course it will defoliate early. Now, this is fatal. Now, it's not a quick killer, it's a slow killer. So, 4 or 5 years, you're going to see less and less foliage come back every year, and it is just a slow killer. Also, we see pH sensitivity, iron chlorosis. So that's a fancy way of saying that they're not getting iron because of the pH. And these are some trees I took photos of in a new neighborhood, relatively new neighborhood there in Murfreesboro. They're all nude, it seems like. These are both willow oaks. The one on the left is willow oak, and the one on the right is a pin oak. And you can see those clearly do not look healthy. And they unfortunately had signs of bacterial leaf scorch and iron chlorosis. And you can see that's what they look like up close. So there's this chart here. You probably may have seen it before. This is basically pH and nutrient availability. And if you notice iron here, it's typically available most to these plants at a slightly lower pH. Well, a lot of our soils, at least here in Middle Tennessee, are somewhat basic soils. So they're a little higher in pH. So you could put a dump truck full of iron around the base of every one of these trees, but if your pH is low, there's no way for these trees to pull that iron out of the soil. It's way smarter than I can explain. It's above my pay grade. All I know is that iron is bound in the chemistry of that soil, and what results is a pale yellow color because iron helps that tree maintain a dark green color. So when we see that pale color, it could be a sign of pH. Japanese hollies, my goodness. Now these are a dime a dozen. They are a great, cheap, evergreen plant. I think every contractor in America plants these by the millions every year. As the name would imply, Japanese holly, it is not native to Tennessee. The native range of this plant is on sloped mountains, hillsides in Japan. And I don't know about you or me, but I don't live on a sloped mountain hillside in Japan. I live in Rockville, Tennessee. We didn't get that name because we have deep, rich soil. I will say that. You can interpret what my soil is like. But the problem that I see, 99% of the time is a root rot disease called Phytophthora. And this is basically where these plants are in poorly drained soils. It's basically like sitting in a clay pot. And when that moisture is constantly around the root systems, those roots begin to desiccate. This is sky pencil holly. It's a cultivar that's also a Japanese holly. And you can see here the signs and the symptoms. Basically, you're going to start seeing dieback, and it'll be a little bit more each year. And if you were to dig those plants up, you're going to notice that there's a lot of blackened, sunken, just unhealthy looking roots there. Hybrid red maples. This one is also kind of painful to put on this list, but they have proven themselves time and time again to be real duds. Now they're beautiful. We go back to that photo there. I mean, they're striking in the fall. I mean, there's nothing that beats it. Maybe a sweet gum, or I'm sorry, a sourwood tree, but they're pretty striking. But there's a lot of problems. We have sun scald, freeze injury, girdling roots, and wood-boring insects. The picture on the left there, this is the southwest facing exposure. And what happens in the summertime, you think about a maple tree's bark, it's thin versus like an oak tree that's very platy. And because that bark is thin, basically when that sun hits it, it has this capacity to cause a sunburn, coupled with what we call freeze injury. So maples, any acer tree is a sap flowing tree. When that sap starts to move back up into the trunk in the late winter, like this, like today, it was 74 degrees when I was on my way home. You better believe that those trees are starting to pull sap up. And what's going to happen? I guarantee you we're going to have another hard freeze before winter is over. And when that bark in that cambium layer is full of that sap and we get a hard freeze, it splits that bark open, and that's the result. Girdling roots here. This is a picture I took in 2012. A lady called me saying her maple was droopy. It was early in the summer. It was super hot and dry. And she had been running that garden hose that you see in the photo for a solid week. Got out in her front yard and it was a swamp, but the tree was still droopy. And I knew exactly what the problem was. I did some archaeological investigating, pulled all the pine straw away, and sure enough, there was this root there that was basically strangulating that tree. I don't even know if that's the word, strangulating. But anyways, it was not allowing water to be pulled up through that trunk. And girdling roots are a huge problem. And then we have flathead borers that are also, when these trees get stressed, either by sun scald or girdling roots, you're going to have borer damage. And this is how we like to mulch our trees, right? This is that same neighborhood where I took all these other photos. And these landscape contractors, they have it in their contract. They're going to put down mulch twice a year, whether it needs it or not. And when mulch gets piled up on those trunks like that, not only is it a death sentence for trees, it just causes a lot of rot conditions and anaerobic conditions. It's a great environment for those roots to start growing because roots are lazy. Why would they grow in hard clay when they can grow in that soft mulch? Took this photo here on the left in Chattanooga. You can see there, this is just it's a gnarly mess of girdling roots there. So this is the problem. So honorable mentions, boxwoods, I like them, but man, they sure took a beating in that freeze. And there's a lot of issues that we've seen with them. Laurels, this is your skip laurel, your autoleucon, they get root rot, they get bacterial shot hole. They're not as cold tolerant as people would like. Knockout roses, of course, you probably had them as opposed to have them. They got rosette virus. Red tip Photinia is another dud. Euonymus azalea, and I'm talking the cultivated non-native azaleas. So it's like your encore azaleas and things like that. The native azaleas are wonderful. And our state tree tulip poplar. Again, I have these trees, I plant them, but there's a double whammy that hits these trees. There's an insect that burrows into the trunk and also a rot condition that forms right at the base of these trees. And those two things in combination cause some serious structural issues. And I've been on many a site visit where there's a tulip poplar just laying down in the front yard or on a carport, and it usually is a result of those two things in combination. So what do we look for in a good plant? Well, it's tolerable of just about any site. It can tolerate clay, compaction, poorly drained areas. It's just good for any site. It's very versatile. Strong growth habit, shape, and overall desirable characteristics. It's less susceptible to diseases and insects. It has no invasive potential. It's tough and hardy. We think about the last, 2022 when we had that flash freeze in December. It went from 60 degrees to it was -2 at my house. A lot of those evergreens and a lot of those plants didn't come back. So we want stuff that's hardy and visually appealing. So I'm not going to cover every single one of these because we'd be here till 3 o'clock tomorrow afternoon, and I will share these with you. So I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this list here, but we're going to talk about a couple of my favorites. Oak trees are phenomenal trees. They are a host plant. And by host plant, I mean they can butterflies and moths will lay their eggs on an oak tree, and their larval forms will use an oak as a food source to develop into maturity. They're a host plant for over 500 different species, potentially for butterflies and moths. So they're a wonderful native plant. They're a great ecological preserver of life in your backyard. They're a great tree. This is my favorite swamp white oak. It's Quercus bicolor. The maturity on these trees, it's going to get pretty big. They can get 100 foot tall over many, many years. None of us will be alive to see it, but they can get pretty big. And the thing that I love most about these trees is they can tolerate completely dry upland sites, just bone dry, hard compacted soil, or they can tolerate in a low field that's just soggy and messy, as the name would imply, swamp white oak. And they're a great urban tree for large spaces. I wouldn't plant this in your backyard where you only have a 20 by 20 patch of grass. There's another tree I'm going to point out for that, but this is a great tree for big spaces. And these are trees that were planted in Murfreesboro. And you can see this planting median here, that's probably 6 foot across. And they've been volcano mulched. And these trees probably been in the ground maybe 5, 6 years. And they are happy as healthy as can be. I mean, they're dark green color. They're growing well. Now, they're planted way too close together. I don't think they'll ever get anywhere near the size that they're supposed to, just because there's less permeable soil. But they're very healthy and happy. I mean, this is potentially what it could look like if it was out in an open area, 100 years from now. In that same neighborhood, again, this was such a great neighborhood to go to. You see that tree on the left, that was a pin oak. It's probably planted by the same guy on the exact same day. Pin oak on the left, got bacterial leaf scorch and iron chlorosis versus the swamp white oak right there on the right side of the page. It is just dark green and happy and healthy. So that picture speaks for itself. So Zelkova, now my native plant purist will get on to me for a few of these trees. I do love native plants, but I'm not one of these people that's going to bash you over the head if you want to plant something that's non-native, if it's something that does well here and it's not invasive. But Japanese Zelkova, there's a ton of them out there. And around here in Middle Tennessee, they can tolerate just about any site imaginable. They're tough, they're hardy, and they will get different size. Most of them will range anywhere from 50 to 80 feet. And some of them can get 60 foot wide. But again, they're going to tolerate any type of site you can imagine. And they have a nice vase-shaped form, and they have really nice fall color as well. We'll talk about some of these cultivars. This is that same neighborhood again. You can see that beautiful vase-like shape, kind of a choppy appearance, really nice urban tree. And again, they will get some fall color. I took the photos a little bit past prime here in their fall color. You can see they'll have an orangey, yellowish, kind of a burgundy color, and they're very pretty at their peak. So here's some cultivars. Village Green, it's been out there for years. Nice vase shape there. Green vase is my favorite. And again, it's very dense, compacted, vase-like shape. And then there's some other varieties. This one is called Wireless. It will actually be wider than it is tall. You can see 24 by 36. And then City Sprite is a smaller variety, 24 by 18, according to what the internet told me. I've not grown that one. So one of my other favorite trees is lacebark elm, or I think people will call these Chinese elms. So they're not native, Ulmus parvifolia. And they'll range in size anywhere from 30 to 50 feet at height and width. And they're a lot like the Zelkovas. They're very adaptable. I think Michael Durr, who is kind of the plant, he's just one of the most well-known horticulturalists in the world, really. He called these unbelievably adaptable. And that was quoted out of his Durr's Woody Plant Manual. And again, it can tolerate any type of soil. It's very hardy in heat and drought and cold conditions. Really nice, dense, rounded habit. And it's another great urban tree. And it has exfoliating bark, which you'll see in these photos. Look where this tree's planted. It's in a small, 10 by 10 median. It's not getting any TLC, I'll tell you that. There's no irrigation. It's just in the middle of this hot parking lot. And this tree was absolutely as healthy and happy as could possibly be. So that's a testament. And there's a picture in early fall, hadn't quite reached peak, but this is really the best part, in my opinion, of these trees is this exfoliating bark. Kind of has a camo-like pattern. I've gotten many calls over the course of my career. When these trees start to get scaly like that, a homeowner will call me very concerned to say, my elm tree has a disease. And I have to give them the great news that, no, this is what it's going to look like. So I hope you like it. But again, you can see that just striking patterns in that tree. It reminds me of a sycamore. If any of you have ever had a sycamore tree, kind of that same flaky, smooth, flaky, or crepe myrtles will do the same thing, but really a nice tree. And you can see these two here around the pool house. Again, not planted in a big area. They're in competition for resources with the juniper balone, and they're doing great. So this was summer, and there it is in the fall. Absolute great urban tree. This is an apartment complex, and just really, really nice shape. One of my favorites. Bosque has been out there for years. It's probably the most popular one that's been around. Allier is another one. This is Everclear, which is more of a, I don't know if we can call it a columnar form, but it will stay a little more narrow, 20 foot tall. And then New Horizon. And again, there are a bunch of them out there. You just can look them up, and there's probably 20 cultivars easily available on the market now. So let's talk about black gum. Now, these will not go well with every site. I know you'll see a lot of these in West Tennessee, those deep, rich, silty river bottom soils. But if you got the right spot, they'll do pretty good. You do need somewhat moderate drainage. I wouldn't plant it in the middle of a hard clay compacted site. And the reason I love a black gum is the fall color. I mean, it is absolutely stunning. The bark kind of reminds me of what is it, a persimmon that has that blocky, or a sassafras. But the fall color, these pictures I took myself at a commercial shopping center here in Murfreesboro at the Avenue. And the picture really doesn't do it justice, but my goodness, that was the darkest, richest red of any tree I had ever seen in my life. It beat the red maples. It was just stunning, and the sun was hitting it just right that day. It was spectacular. And these trees are sorely neglected. They're growing on a slope, but you can see here they're growing at the edge of this parking lot on a slope site. So they're having, they're getting good drainage, and they were doing great. So these trees are really nice. Red Rage is a variety. Wildfire is a popular variety. You could just see that in the fall. I mean, just stunning, spectacular color. Sherry's Cloud, what a great one. And this next one's a Zydeco Twist. These are two unique varieties. The Sherry's Cloud is variegated. I don't know what the fall color on that one is. I know that it's out there, but I don't know what the fall color is. But this one is a contorted form. It's a Deco Twist, pretty unique. And both of these are available. I see them from time to time. So it's not impossible to find those. This one's a little harder to find, but I wanted to mention it. It's non-native. It's native to Japan. Cercidophylla japonicum, Katsura tree. Kind of an obscure tree, but it's worth talking about just because I think it's beautiful and it's pretty tough. It does not do well in a very poorly drained site, but it does need, somewhat moist soil that drains well. And the reason I like these trees is that they are just very pretty to me. You'll notice that the leaf shape is very similar to a redbud, and there's got to be some long lost ancestor that these trees are both related. You look at the botanical name Cercidophyllum, and our redbud is Cercis. So somewhere along the evolutionary timeline, these trees split off, and they're very similar in their leaf, except these have a scalloped edge. The growth habit is what we would call a pagoda shape. If you think of a Japanese pagoda, kind of has those tiers, looks really nice. This is the new growth. When it comes out in spring, it'll be very vibrant, burgundy, pinkish in color. And look at the fall color. My goodness, it reminds me of a ginkgo biloba. If you've ever had a ginkgo tree, if you've seen it in the fall, it's just a vibrant golden color. Well, these will have hues of red and orange in there as well. And there's some really nice varieties out there. This is a weeping form, Amazing Grace. And this is my personal favorite, Red Fox. I remember the first time I ever saw a Katsura tree was in Mount Juliet, Tennessee, probably 15 years ago at a garden center that used to be there, Moss Forest and Garden Center. This tree was growing in the middle of a nursery area, just solid gravel, just in a little planter, 4x4 planter. And it was just the most stunning color early in the season. It reminded me a lot of a burgundy smoke tree in color. Just a great little tree there. It was just very pretty. This is a smaller, kind of a globe form, heronwood globe, as the name would imply. Marioka weeping, that is a showstopper right there. Now, I don't know where you can find that one, but if you can, man, what a nice tree. Now, this one here, this is probably one of my favorite. Now, we can call this a semi-native tree. I don't know the exact history of it, but we have a native smoke tree, but it is green in appearance. It does not have the burgundy. If I remember correctly, this tree's been crossed with a non-native species that I think was native to somewhere in Asia, but we're going to call it a native for all intents and purposes. I know that down in McMinnville, I think it was Don Shadow actually had some of these growing in his woods, and I think he cultivated them. I can't be for sure, but they're a smaller tree. 20 by 30 foot for most of them is going to be max, and the same in width. These are a wonderful crepe myrtle alternative. I have become I don't like crepe myrtles anymore, and I should have put those on my dud list. They don't tolerate the winter very well, and they get crepe myrtle bark scale. They get aphids, powdery mildew. I mean, you name it. This is a wonderful alternative. You can simply limb them up, as you see in this photo. Talk about a tough tree. I mean, this thing is absolutely as tough as can be. And it has that unique, we call it inflorescence. That's a fancy word for the floral structure, and it's very smoky. And I'll show you some up close pictures. Now, there are many varieties now on the market, but I think Grace is probably the most popular. That one there on the left is down at Grow Wild in Fairview. Mike Berkeley grew this tree out, and it was probably 30 foot tall, and it's kind of choppy. Now, this one on the right has a story. This is my parents' house. They bought this house probably 3 or 4 years ago, and they inherited a pretty lousy landscape. And my dad asked me, "What can I plant in the yard?" And I said, "I think you should get a smoke tree." Now, I did not think you should plant this tree where it is planted. I will say that. But I want you to look closely. Let me see. Is there a little laser pointer thing here that I always, let me see if I can find it. Anyways, let me go back. Sorry. If you look down there toward the bottom, there's just one little clump of red, burgundy color. He bought a smoke bush. That was the original size of it. I'm talking, 2 by 2. And I said, "Dad, what the heck is this thing? This is not a smoke tree. This is a smoke little pom-pom." Anyways, he planted here. Again, nothing was done right according to what I had asked him to do. But you know what? God bless him. His last name ends in SKI like mine. So we're Polacks and we can't help ourselves sometimes. But anyways, I digress. I'm full of bad dad jokes. It's hard to get the reaction on Zoom. I'm just going to assume you guys are laughing. I'm hearing it in my brain from afar. So anyways, this smoke tree, he planted it as this little bitty shrub probably 3 years ago. I took this photo last summer. That's 3 years, okay, in a trashy little clay soil area, new home construction, compacted soil, absolutely no organic matter to speak of. And my dad planted it improperly. I can guarantee you that. It was probably root bound. He probably didn't do anything to it. He dug a hole just big enough to fit it in the ground, wedged it in with his foot, put some mulch on it, and called it done. And 3 years later, no joke, this tree was 20 foot tall. And you can see there, he's attempted to limb it up. I'll give him credit for that. He is a master gardener now, so hopefully this year he'll do a little better. But this tree just took off. Once it rooted in, it did phenomenal. And it has received absolutely no love or care, no fertilizer, and it's just phenomenal. So it was a lot of time spent on that, but I wanted to point that out to you. Look at that. I mean, if that doesn't speak for itself, this is the new fresh growth. This is the burgundy one, obviously, in the spring. Just when that light hits it from behind, it's absolutely stunning. And this is the floral structure and why it gets that name smoke tree. It's very hairy, kind of light and fluffy. And this isn't everybody's cup of tea. I understand some people hate these trees, but boy, I sure like them. They're unique, they're tough, and they're a wonderful alternative to crepe myrtles. And Grace is out there. I actually bought one last fall at Home Depot, and I can't even tell you the cultivar. I should have took a photo of it, but Grace has been out there for years, 15 by 15, and there seems to be more of them every year on the market. Get one. You can't go wrong. They're all wonderful. This is a non-native tree, but another one of my favorites. This is a chase tree or Vitex agnus castus. And there are many varieties out there, and they are another crepe myrtle alternative. You can limb them up, and there's a lot of nice cultivars out there. From my personal experience, they tolerate just about any site you can put them in. I've put them in dry clay soils. I've put them in kind of a wet, soggy soils. Just very versatile trees, and pollinators love them. You name any type of pollinator that comes within scent of this tree, they're going to find it. It'll bloom these large panicle type blooms from June to August. I've seen them even bloom later than that, depending on the site. And there's a bunch of cultivars out there, and the leaf looks a lot like a certain plant that some people, I don't say we, some people use for having a good time. So I had a concerned mother call me one time, and the neighbor had a Vitex, but the mother called me and she says, I need you to come out and identify a plant. This was like 15 years ago, before we had, cell phone photos and, email. People just couldn't do it. So I'm like, okay, I'll go out and look at it. She was concerned that her son was smoking pot next to the air conditioner and that he was casting the seeds out. And she was convinced that there was a pot plant growing next to the AC unit. And I knew it wasn't, but I said, okay, I'll humor this lady and go out there and look. And it was a Vitex tree. The neighbor had one. I guarantee one of the seeds, the bird ate it and sat on that air conditioner. And, it's an encapsulated fertilized seed, hit the ground and it grew, and there it was. But anyways, I digress. These are not invasive, but in that particular spot, it grew from seed there. So this is kind of the choppiest shape, that kind of has a multi-trunked habit. They're not a tree. They're more of a shrub, but you can limb them up. And you can see there that beautiful panicle type bloom. I'm really partial to anything with that bluish purple color. I just love that in the landscape. And you can see there when these are limbed up and cared for properly, just a stunning, showstopper of a shape there. Really, really attractive trees. And they absolutely will be that full of flowers. This one's Abable Blue, 10 by 10, kind of a darker purple color. This is one at our West Tennessee Research and Education Center. If you guys have ever been to Summer Celebration, this one's right outside the front door of their main building. This one's called Delta Blues. This one here, man, look at that galactic pink. I want to get my hands on one of these. I know Jason Reeves was talking about this one not long ago, but man, what a beautiful plant that is. And my favorite, right, as of right now, is Shoal Creek. This is one that I've been, in love with for years. It can be 12 by 12 typically, and it's just a really nice, robust Vitex. So this is an oak tree here that's new. I don't want to say it's new, but it hasn't really been available on the market very long. Now I'll tell you this, they're not going to give these trees away. This is the dwarf chinkapin oak, Quercus prinoides. There is a chinkapin oak that is huge. This is not that. I wish they hadn't have called it such a similar name, but this is a dwarf chinkapin oak. It's not related to the other chinkapin oak. It's Quercus prinoides, and it is a true dwarf oak. The mature size max out about 25 foot tall, probably be somewhere close to 20 feet, but 25 foot in a great area, 25 foot in width. And again, it's very tolerant of clay soils, shallow soils, and it's moderately fast growing. That's the key. So it's not going to take 30, 40 years for that tree to reach maturity. It may only take 5 or 10 years. And again, it's a good host for pollinators. And it's got almost like an English oak type leaf. Very, very unique. This is one that Mike Berkeley had at Grow Wild. I think he said this one was 4 or 5 years old. And you can see there it was already up to probably 15 foot tall, and it was doing great. This is an older one. This was just a photo off the internet, but look how great that looks. I mean, it has that true oak shape to it. So if you have a smaller yard, if you're in a townhome and you still want to enjoy an oak for its just to have an oak tree, this is certainly one to look for. Again, Grow Wild in Fairview, which is in Williamson County. It's a little bit of a drive for a lot of you guys. They'll have these trees, but they're becoming available slowly but surely, and they're not cheap. I will say that they're cost prohibitive. Now, this tree here, I should have put an asterisk next to it, the red buckeye. I think there's a hatred for these trees simply because of their association with the Ohio State University. Now, I'm going to say this: I'm not a Buckeye. I am from Ohio. Okay, I'll admit it. But I've been in Tennessee since 1995. I think I've naturalized well. Chris and his crew accepted me in Van Buren County, so to me, that means I made it, right? They made me lasagna one time. I mean, I felt like a real Tennessean that day. And Chris, I thank you for that. But I think people hate this tree simply because it's called a Buckeye. But they're great trees in the right spot. They are not going to do well in a poorly drained, soggy bottom area, but they will do great in where they grow native. And their native habitat, think about where dogwoods and redbuds grow, at the edge of a wood line, kind of a canopy, understory tree. That's where these trees are found in nature. And they're spectacular. They're a nice little understory tree. Again, they are shade tolerant. They do like moist but well-drained soils, and it will be an absolute pollinator magnet. Hummingbirds, butterflies, moths, any type of a pollinator will love these trees. So again, you can see where it's growing here, kind of at the edge of that wood line. Wonderful trees at maturity. And you can see that flower. Now, I got a call one year from a lady. She said, my Buckeye has a disease. It has galls on it. And again, I knew exactly what it was. It was Buckeyes. She had never seen it produce Buckeyes, and there they are. So it will give you Buckeyes. All right, let's talk about evergreens. So we'll start with our large evergreens and cover some of these. This is probably the question I get more than anything from homeowners and even contractors, like what good evergreens are out there. If you guys remember that freeze, so many of our evergreens just bit the dust, or they're just never recovered. You think about cryptomeria far and wide. I mean, they just seem to die everywhere. Laurels was another one. They died back to the ground. I had skip laurels here at the house that were 10 foot tall, and they died back to the ground completely. Now, a lot of them came back, but a lot of them didn't. Boxwood is another one. Man, they took a beating. So get a lot of evergreen questions. And this tree is another tree that is maligned and hated. And I've made it my career goal. If there's one thing I accomplish before I retire, it's I want people to appreciate our native eastern red cedar. This is my favorite tree of all time, hands down. Nothing even comes close. I absolutely love these trees. I'm going to try to convince you why. There's this old adage that they're tick magnets, and maybe there's some truth to that. I don't know. I'm not an entomologist. I haven't done the research, but I have never found these trees to be any more of a tick magnet than any other plant that's grown in my backfield. I mean, that's just my personal experience. I think if you think about where the eastern red cedar grows, that's where ticks are, right? They kind of go hand in hand. I don't think these trees are necessarily a tick magnet. But again, This is the trait species picture here. I mean, they'll get, 30 to 40 foot tall, 10 to 20 foot wide or wider. They're indestructible. And not virtually, as I say here. They are literally indestructible. They're right up there with Bermuda grass, cockroaches, and sewer rats. I mean, if all else fails on this earth, there will be eastern red cedars and cockroaches. They are as tough can be. Again, they're our native evergreen. You see these. I was talking to a guy today. He said he had one grow up between the cracks in his driveway, and he dug it up and he planted it, and it's doing great. But that just shows you how tough these trees are. And it's used to our weather extremes. I remember when we had that flash freeze in 22, I looked around at all the cultivated evergreens and they were just pitiful. And all of our native trees, our eastern red cedars, they were just like, whatever. I mean, it didn't even phase them. It didn't turn them brown. They were completely unfazed. And there's some great cultivars out there. So these are trees I took a photo of. If any of you have ever been to a race up here in Lebanon, Nashville Super Speedway, there's a big highway they cut in there, Highway 452, and they did the road cut. And of course, it's Wilson County, so you know there's going to be cedar trees. And these cedar trees are growing in just churty, dusty limestone soil and little cracks in the ground. And they are just absolutely thriving. And that's just a testament to how tough they are. And there are some good cultivars now on the market that are derivatives of our eastern red cedar native tree. And this one is called Berkey. You'll get about 20 foot, 15-foot width. It's going to get pretty wide, but it's a good Leland cypress alternative. And this one has a kind of a slightly bluish, more true juniper color. And it again, it just has that nice kind of a choppier shape. This one's called Brody, and it will be a little bit denser, and it's going to stay a little more narrow, 25 by 12. And again, all of these are good Leland cypress alternatives. Brody is out there. Now, this one I have a love-hate relationship with. It's a showstopper. It's stunning. It is a tall columnar form. And if you've ever been out in like California, or if you've been to Italy, I think I don't know exactly what type of trees they are, but they are maybe Italian cypress. I'm probably wrong on that, but you've seen them. They're tall, skinny trees. All the big, Hollywood stars have them. They're lining all their nice neighborhoods. But this tree is a derivative, again, of our native eastern red cedar. It's called Taylor. I've seen a lot of these trees kind of struggle, and I don't know exactly why. Toward the ground level, let's say 3 foot and down, they seem to be pretty sparse. So just about everyone I've seen planted doesn't look like this. I will say that. Maybe you've got the right spot to try it. But again, I like it. It's got a great shape, but in the landscape, they've had some issues. So I will say that. This is a shrub form. This is gray owl. And again, this is one that I used to hate because it occasionally can get root rot. I'll be honest with you. If you've got a very heavily clay soils, poor drainage, they could potentially get root rot. But again, they're our native trees, so they're somewhat tolerable. And this will have a nice grayish blue color, and it will be pretty wide. If you've got a koi pond or something like that, boy, these look really nice. They kind of cascade over out the edge, and they contrast really well with a red Japanese maple as well. So this is a holly. Moving on past our eastern red cedar. Again, they're great. Use them, plant them. I will say this about eastern red cedar. I've dug up many of these trees out of the woods and tried to transplant them. I've had about a 50% success rate. So they're finicky, and I think it's just because they have a long taproot and it's hard to dig them up. The best luck I've had is digging them up when they're about the size of my index finger, and they seem to do great. But anyways, I love them. I hope you will learn to love them too. So this is a holly. This is been around for years. Nellie R. Stevens holly. And again, this is a wonderful plant. It's very tough. It'll get 25 foot tall and at least 15 foot wide. They get pretty wide. Michael Durr calls this the grand dame of landscape hollies. And boy, when Michael Durr says something like that, we ought to listen because he knows his stuff. He's seen every holly that there is possibly to be seen, and he calls this the grand dame of landscape hollies. These are the toughest hollies I can think of. I was at a site visit last year. It was a town-owned community that was built probably 5 years ago, and they just wanted me to do an assessment of their landscape. And boy, they don't call us out when things are doing good, do they, Chris? We get called out when things are in bad shape. And I hate that. I wish somebody would call me and show me their awesome plants, but I only see bad dying plants. So they called me out there to do a site visit. There was a contractor that managed every yard. It was an HOA community. And there was a planting berm that they called it a berm. It really wasn't. And they had planted these on top of exposed limestone. I'm telling you, it was just an exposed limestone area. They piled up some clay soil and they just threw these Nellie R. Stevens in. Now, this picture is not that neighborhood, but they were essentially what we would call heeled in, which means you're storing them temporarily in a spot before you actually plant them. And the root balls were exposed, the burlap was still on them, the cage was still on them. They basically did nothing but just throw some clay around it, put some mulch in, and they called it done. And would you believe it that those Nellie R. Stevens were absolutely fine? I mean, again, I don't know of any other plant that is that resilient and tough. Just a great pyramidal shape, sun and somewhat shade tolerant. So they're not going to be as dense in the shade. I've got three of them in my backyard that are growing in full shade under big giant oak trees. And they're a little more sparse, but they're doing just fine. And they get red fruit as well. And again, just a really nice, they're a good standalone species like this, but they really look good in a screen planting. And you can see there's the fruit. Cedar waxwings, if you know what that bird is, they will go crazy for them. They love mine. This one is an old-fashioned plant, but I just wanted to mention it. Foster holly's been around for years. And I was in Franklin, I think this was last summer. Me and my wife like to go antiquing because we have geriatric hobbies. And we're walking around the square in Franklin, and I saw this Foster holly. Now, this is the one gripe I have with these trees. Look where this tree was planted. And I guarantee when this tree was planted, it was probably 5 foot tall and about 2 foot wide. They planted it right in the corner of the house, right? Because everybody wants an evergreen on the corner of their house. So why people do this, I have no idea. But this tree was there, and it's probably been there since this house was built. Who knows? And that house is pretty old. It's probably 50, 60-year-old Foster holly, but you can see it is just spectacular, towering over things. Not planted in the right spot, but boy, it sure is pretty. They'll get every bit of 30 foot tall. They can reach about 10 to 15 foot in width. Again, they're old fashioned, but they are, you talk about cold tolerant. According to Michael Durr, this is one of the most cold tolerant hollies out there. And they have a narrow form and they grow up pretty tall. This is one here. I think this is somewhere in East Tennessee. I took that photo there. And this is a younger one, again, right on the corner. And shearing is harmful to plants. I will say that. I'm a pruning purist. I like to do natural pruning, but there are very few plants that can do well being sheared. Don't tell anybody I told you this, but Foster holly is probably one of them. They can take a shearing and still be okay. So if you want to do some unique topiary, you go right on ahead. They will get berries on them. I think there's a Foster holly #2 is an improved variety, but I don't know. I don't even see these things available anymore. If you can find one, they're certainly worth having. Arizona cypress, people have a love-hate relationship with these. I know some people will say, well, I had them and they didn't do that hot, but in the right spot, if you've got decent soil, somewhat good drainage, they can do just fine. And I like them simply because they're different. I like that bluish color and they have a kind of a unique foliage. And there are many different varieties out there. But again, they do prefer slightly dry, well-drained soil. And again, they get really feathery and choppy with age, so it looks really nice. And you can see there, that is the foliage. It's kind of a unique, almost looks like a primitive ancient plant. And that is the pine cone there, the seed there, pretty unique as well. I was in Sedona, Arizona a couple years ago, and the evergreens that you see out in front of us there, those are Arizona cypress. That's its native range. I mean, so we have these plants that this is their version of an eastern red cedar. Let's just put it that way. You think that soil is wet? No, it is not. It stays bone dry year round. I mean, they get some big rains in the summer, but outside of that, when I was there in May, if you so much as hit a rock and made a spark, I think all of it would have just torched. So these trees are tough, but they do not like super wet soil. That's the one gripe that I've heard from people. And you can see they have just a really nice shape, really, really nice shape. And again, totally unique foliage. Let's talk about some varieties. Blue ice has been out there for years. 25 by 10. This is a good complementary plant, in my opinion. I wouldn't plant a whole row of these by themselves. If you mix these in, let's say with a Nellie R. Stevens and maybe a Brody holly or a Brody or some type of eastern red cedar, that would look really nice. This one's Carolina sapphire, and these are particularly columnar. I've not seen them grow this narrow before, but these have probably been sheared a little bit, but it gets 30 by 15, very popular variety. This one is Blue Pyramid. This is on the campus of ETSU, and it's 20 by 15. You can see just a super unique color, and I really like it. This one is really fancy, Raywood Weeping. You can see that's a pretty unique exotic form. Limelight is one it's going to have that yellowy chartreusey type color, and it's pretty narrow, 20 by 5. I have not seen this one at maturity, only seen it in its younger stage. And then Sulfuria, this is one that it'll have kind of a yellowish hue to it. And again, it contrasts really well in the landscape with anything that's burgundy or red. It's just really striking color contrast. Now, my favorite evergreen outside of Eastern Red Cedar is Fall Cypress, Chamaecyparis piscifera. And there are many different Chamaecyparis. My gosh, there's tons and tons of them. But this is the species Piscifera. And there are many different Fall Cypress. Mature size will vary by variety. And again, these things are as tough as can be. When you think back to that freeze in 22, I made special notes in my brain. All right, this is a great time to evaluate how evergreens did. And outside of Eastern Red Cedars, these guys were right next to them. I mean, they absolutely were unfazed by the cold temperatures. And they are very tough in the summer. I mean, just really, really tough. And there's a million different varieties out there. And you can see there's tree formed ones, there's more columnar ones, bluish color, there's choppy little globe forms, just a ton of different cultivars out there. This is called Golden Mop, and this one is at the Cumberland UT Gardens up in Cumberland County. And I don't know what they're doing to this thing, but this thing was not 6 by 5. I don't know if any of y'all have been up to that gardens there, but this is at the UT Gardens there in Crossville. And that thing was 7 or 8 foot tall and at least that wide. And I don't know what they're feeding it. I don't know what they've done to it. It's probably been there for 30 years, but it's huge. I see these get planted, these golden mops, when they build a new house, they'll plant 3 of them 2 foot apart. And then in 5 years, they're just a mess. So these can get pretty big, but that's golden mop. This is a nice little dwarf variety cream ball. This was out at the UT Gardens there in Crossville, 2 by 2. And then this one's Iceberg, another variety. And I've heard that this Iceberg is almost unfindable nowadays. So I still keep it in there because it's, have fun finding it though. Curly Tops is a pretty unique one, kind of a denser blue color, 10 by 8. Really like this one, Snow. You can see it kind of has a white tip and it really looks pretty cool. This is a newer variety, Soft Serve Gold. Now this one will have a gold hue to it, but there's also a Soft Serve that's been out for a while and it will just be more of a green color. And there's some big ones. This is Folifera aurea. You can see 20 by 8. Really nice pyramidal shape. Boulevard, this is get 20 by 15. And then this is just straight Folifera. But got that light, lacy foliage. Just really nice in the landscape. And tough and super tough. Super tough. Arbovitas. So there are some that are better than others. People have a love-hate relationship with these. I do get calls every year. Somebody will plant arbovitas and they're struggling. And most of the time when I see them struggle is they've been planted in extremely poor soils. And by that, I mean new constructed neighborhoods, compacted clay, no drainage, irrigated, constantly being overwatered. And a lot of times contractors will plant these things, they will leave the burlap on them, they'll leave all the twine and the string, and they'll throw them in the ground and leave them. And that's where I see these things struggle. Or they're planted too deeply. That's probably one of the #1 killers I see of any landscape tree or shrub is the planting depth. But outside of that, they're pretty resilient. And there's just so many different varieties out there. I'm going to look at 3 different species, Occidentalis, Orientalis, and Plicata. Again, they're pretty tolerant of clay, but they do like drained soil. Okay, so if you've got a spot that just stays soggy all the time, don't try putting an arborvitae there. They can do full sun to part shade. And again, there are just endless numbers of varieties out there. They're a good screen planting plant. Mix them in. There's small little globe form. There's really nice yellowy colored ones. I'll talk about some of them. Green Giant. This is still a great plant. This is Green Giant arborvitae. It's probably the biggest evergreen that I know of that we can use in our landscape for screen planting. It will get every bit of 50 foot tall. And again, these I see planted way too close together 9 times out of 10. I went on a site visit back in the fall. A lady planted 20 of these up along her driveway, brand new neighborhood, and she had them 5 foot apart. 5 foot apart. And I told her, I said, lady, these are too close. I actually knew this woman personally. And I told her, I said, you're going to have to remove about every 3 of these. And she just didn't want to do it. So we'll see how that goes. This is one Niagara 20 by 10. And this one here is Technique. This is a pretty cool one. It gets pretty wide, 10 foot tall and 15 foot wide. You see those every now and then. This was one we actually have here at our office. This is not our office, obviously, but this is Sunkissed, and it has a really nice yellow hue to it. I've never seen them get 8 foot wide, but ours is probably 4 or 5 foot wide, and it's probably 8 foot tall. This one is De Groot's Spire. And as this tree ages, it will have more than one trunk. So this one looks pretty young. It has a single trunk, but you'll see these where they have two or three really nice upright trunks. And this is a pretty narrow one. It'll get 20 foot tall by about 5 foot width. Pretty unique arborvitae. And then Smaragd, try to say that one 10 times fast. It's Ragd. It's got to have some Nordic origin. I don't know. I don't know how anybody speaks those languages up there. But anyways, this one's been out for a while. This is Hetz Midget. This is a great, just a foundation planting if you want an evergreen around your house, 4x5. Rheingold's been out there for God knows how long. It's a gold standard one, no pun intended. Rheingold 5x5, really tough little one. Anna's Magic Balls, another really nice one. Nice little choppy globe shape. And arborvitaes, they're out there using. There's so many cultivars. I only just scratched the surface. Loropetalum, love-hate relationship. I know people either love them or they hate them. I know that they did not tolerate the freeze that well, but they all came back. I have about 10 of them here at home. Most of them died back to the ground, and actually they came back bigger and better. Sometimes plants respond well and they just completely die back. But these are semi-evergreen. We're not going to call them full evergreens. They're semi-evergreen. They're not native, but they have some unique characteristics. They're pretty tough and they tolerate shade. They can go in full sun or shade. Mine are in deep, deep shade. And there's many cultivars out there. And I like them just because they add some nice color to a shady spot and they will flower. And mine flower twice a year. I'll get flowers, late winter, early spring, and they sometimes will flower again going into the winter, late summer, fall into winter. And they're pretty unique. They have a nice choppy shape to them. And it's just a really pretty flower. And there are some varieties that are white. This one's called Snow Panda, and it's pretty big, 10x8. This is Carolina Midnight, 12x10. And this is what I have at home. This is Zhuzhou Fuchsia, and it's huge. I mean, that's it right there. It's pretty big. So they can get pretty leggy. So I try to keep them chopped back once they get leggy like that. Ruby, this is one that's been out there for years. If you had knockout roses, this is a great knockout rose alternative. Really nice, dense shape, 5x5. Crimson Fire, 3x5. This is a lower growing one. It'll get wider than it does tall. Purple Diamond, another one that's been out there for years, 5x5. If you hear a child in the background, that's my son. So, don't worry about that. He likes to scream when I'm on Zoom meetings. There are some varieties here, and some people hate these things, these smaller dwarf varieties, but they're good fillers for potted plants. Purple Pixie, Jazz Hands Mini, and Fire Dance. So anyways, those are loropetalums. So let's look at some of our deciduous shrubs. I know our time is running short. There are many different hydrangeas, and I'm not going to cover all of these because there's so many of them, but smooth hydrangeas, arborescens, and Annabelle is a gold standard, has been out there for years. Incredible Blush is one, and then Invincible Lace. So really pretty in the landscape, tough, and I think that might be the research center in McMinnville. I'm not entirely sure. Big leaf hydrangeas, Hydrangea macrophylla. Again, these are the ones that are pH sensitive. So they're either going to be blue or pink in color, depending on the pH. If you have more acidic soil, they'll be blue. If you have more basic soil, they'll be pink. So it just depends. Now these, you buy them at the garden centers or you get them as like a florist plant for Mother's Day and they look great. They don't always do that good in the landscape. They're a little more finicky. So they're not as easy to grow, but Endless Summer's been out there. Goliath, big giant flower. And this one here is a nice variegated Mariesi variegata. Very pretty variegated foliage there. My personal favorite hydrangea is the paniculatas. These are really nice. They get big blooms there. Just really pretty. And there's many different varieties out there. You can see here, and then those flowers will start out either a lime color, they'll turn white, and then toward the end of the season, they'll kind of turn pinkish. And then they even look nice in the winter. You can see there it holds that winter interest in the landscape. This is limelight, and they get big. I mean, they are going to flop over if you don't support them. That's just the reality of growing limelight. Some people hate that, but just prop them up, use a wire or a cage of some kind, and they will get every bit of 8 foot tall in the right spot. This one here, beautiful firelight. This is basically the same thing as the limelight, but it'll turn kind of that purpley pinkish color. Pinky Winky, I love that name. Look at that flower, isn't that pretty? Just really pretty plants. And this is my second favorite, oak leaf hydrangeas. This is a good shade hydrangea. I have these planted under my oak trees at home. They are absolutely just lovely. Big, huge flowers, big panicle blooms. And there are many varieties out there. And you can see that fall foliage. Man, it is just spectacular. This one's called Snowflake. That's a really unique flower. I have never grown this one personally, but I wanted to include this in this presentation just because that flower is so unique. Munchkin, I think this is one that was developed in McMinnville there at the USDA Research Center. Same with ruby slippers. Just beautiful plants. I mean, you can see there. I mean, they look that good too. That's exactly what they're going to look like. That color is spot on. Really pretty. And there's many different other varieties. I know I kind of flew through that. One of my other favorite native plants is a nine-bark Physocarpus apulifolia. Say that 10 times fast. There's many of them out there. They're very tough. I have mine growing in the trashiest clay in my yard underneath oak trees, and it's doing just great. And again, this is a native plant. This is one we have growing out in front of our office there. Just big clusters of flowers. I say big. The clusters are small, but there'll be a lot of them. And they're fragrant, semi-fragrant. And look at that color on this one. It's just a dark burgundy color. Diabolo is the one that I showed you that we have at our office. And it's shrubby. It's not a tree, it's not a shrub. It gets pretty wide. It's more of just a big old kind of a shrubby plant, I guess. But Diabolo 10 by 10. This one is a lime foliage one, darks gold. And then summer wine is the one in the background there. And that's really pretty. Itea, I think we're down to our last few slides, Chris. So if I go long, it won't be very long. This is another native plant. Really like Itea a lot. Itea virginicana, Virginia sweetspire. And there's not a ton of varieties out there. There's a few of them, but just a great plant that grows well in shady soils. And they have wonderful, clusters of flowers like that and beautiful fall color as well. And they're very tough. And you can see those flowers there, just really pretty. But that's the fall color. I mean, it's spectacular. I have some planted in a native planting that I did out in my backfield there, and they look just like that in the fall. I wish I had a photo of them. Just a long, I say long, they're probably 4 or 5 inch long clusters of flowers there. Very pretty. And this is kind of the gold standard, Henry's Garnet. It's been out there for years. And these do look good planted in mass. If you just have one here and one there, that's fine. But they look well planted in groups together. And this one's called Little Henry 3x3. So it's a nice little dwarf variety. So that's all the plants. Let's talk about some resources. This was the book I referred to by Michael Durr. This is the one that I have. There may be a newer version out there, but this is the Durr's Encyclopedia of Trees and Shrubs. And Michael Durr is phenomenal because he has everything listed in alphabetical order, just about every plant you can think of that grows here in North America, native, non-native, and he makes personal anecdotes. Like he'll say, if you look at a certain plant, saw this growing at the University of Georgia, it was a ratty mess, So like if you just read that book, it's not an academic textbook. It is literally his observations, what he's seen, what he recommends. So it's a go-to for me. Great book. uthort.com. Please go to this website. It doesn't look like this anymore. This is an old version of that site, but the URL is the same. There are big tiles on the front that have, vegetable gardens, perennial plants, trees and shrubs, and all of our publications are there. So uthort.com. It's a great resource. I would encourage you to go to it. There's a website that I will give a shout out to our North Carolina colleagues. Now, this website looked like it was designed by Helen Keller from a visual perspective. It's a mess. There's a lot going on that homepage. And no offense to Helen Keller, there's a lot going on here. It's very overwhelming, but there's this little search bar right there in the center. And it's a great resource. So let's say you want to look up Eastern Red Cedar. You can type in Eastern Red Cedar and it will list every cultivar. It'll give characteristics, photos. And the one thing I really like about this, look at that top bar, there's a feature that says Design Gallery. And let's say you want to design a Japanese garden. You can click that. They'll have it listed there and they'll show you different plants and they'll show you an example garden and then they'll talk about every plant that's in there. So anyways, this is the plant toolbox. You can just Google search NC State Gardener Plant Toolbox. So remember, know your site very well. If your site looks like this, you're going to have to grow cedar trees. You're not going to be growing Japanese hollies. Do your homework. You're doing it. I appreciate you guys being here. Purchase good plant material. Never assume that the 15-year-old kid at the garden center has a clue what he's doing because he probably doesn't. I've worked at garden centers in my past, and most of those kids don't have a clue. So do your homework before you go there and enjoy the process. If you're not having fun doing gardening or landscaping, you're not doing it right. It's supposed to be relaxing and enjoyable. So try to keep it that way. Now, I don't know if this is going to work. You can try it. I just made this slide 2 minutes before we got on tonight, but this is my plant list. It may ask you to put a password in, it may not. I'm not exactly sure. But if you guys want to take a photo of that, I'll give you a few seconds there. It will have a listing of all my plants that I recommend. I'm sorry, that's my kid screaming in the background. Um, he is really upset. This is the full plant list, and this is kind of choppy. I know it's all the things that are on my plant list. If y'all would like to take a picture of that, please feel free to do so. I'm sorry about the kid screaming. All right. And I think that's it. So I will say this, you can email me if you would like that plant list emailed to you, or if you want a copy of this presentation, I will be more than happy to send that to you guys. Shoot me an email, jski@utk.edu. And on that note, with my extremely cranky child in the background, that is my last slide, Chris.